since you took over Twitter, since you took over X and have instituted these reforms and released the Twitter files, when we're talking about coercion, significant encouragement, joint participation by federal officials, what have you seen?
Yeah, we've seen all of that at scale with the Twitter files. I mean, we try to basically come clean and publish just how much coercion had happened, and I think there's probably more that we just haven't uncovered yet. But there was, and this is coming from multiple parts of the government, from the State Department, the FBI, Homeland Security, from really many parts of the government. It wasn't just one arm of the government. There was this FBI portal that auto deleted all communications after 2 weeks. So we actually don't know what was said there. In fact, that does strike me as a FOIA violation, a Freedom of Information Act violation, because you shouldn't be able to auto delete things after 2 weeks. There's a little known agency in the State Department called the Global Engagement Center, which most people have never heard of, but they might have been the single worst offender, because they demanded the suspension of at one point over 250,000 accounts, which I think all Twitter largely complied with. But they did it. The suspension demands were so broad that they accidentally demanded a suspension of a journalist on CNN and an elected Canadian politician. It was just an incredibly broad swath. And then, of course, one has to be careful of things that constraints on speech that may be dressed up as one thing, but in fact are political in nature. And if one looks at the suspensions and the visibility suppression that happened at Twitter, it was overwhelmingly like 10 to 1 in favor of Democrats. Like basically, there would be like 10 voices on the right suppressed for every one on the left. And even if there was someone suppressed on the left, it would usually be because of an argument of two people on the left. So it was a very big thumb on the political scale. So I think that that there's a reason that we have the First Amendment, and it's important to think about that. Why does it exist? And it exists because people came from countries where they could not speak freely, where if they did speak their mind, they would be imprisoned or killed. That's why they were so concerned about freedom of speech, is because they didn't have it in the countries they came from. And in many places in the world, maybe most places, you don't have freedom of speech. And there's certainly no country has the protection on speech that the United States does. Not even Canada. So that's it's something we should really take pride in and seek to preserve. Because I think that the bedrock of democracy is freedom of speech. Because if you can't say what you want to say, then I think that's essentially political coercion. If you so anyway, there's a reason why there was a high urgency to amend the Constitution with the First Amendment. It was because if you don't have freedom of speech, you got nothing. So thank you for pursuing this case. I think this is, and I hope the Supreme Court takes action. And I think it's better to be overzealous in protecting free speech than to allow it to be eroded.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you everything you've done in this market to expose some of the wrongdoing, and it does appear that so much that you've uncovered is corroborative of the evidence we've obtained through the discovery process. And again, look, we're in the preliminary phases of this litigation. We did preliminary discovery to get a preliminary injunction, but this isn't over yet. And I couldn't agree with you more that, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he said, in reference to the right to free speech, that it is safe to tolerate error of opinion when reason is left free to combat it. I mean, the whole idea here is that the truth will emerge from the competition of ideas in free, transparent, public discourse. And when you get the government censoring viewpoints, especially in the name of trying to quote unquote protect the public from untruths, it taints that market. In this country, the remedy for disfavored speech has always been counter speech,
Yes.
not censorship. So it seems like a real betrayal of the this legacy of freedom in embodied in the First Amendment for the Biden administration to have undertaken this vast censorship enterprise.
Yeah. I really can't emphasize enough. I think it is essential to a functioning democracy to have freedom of speech, um, and it is, and once it is lost, I don't think it ever comes back. So it's that's I mean that's why it's in the Constitution. Um, the whole point of the Constitution is to
Seems like there's something wrong with the
Yeah, and
stream.
I want to point out too that some of the evidence going back to this idea that the censorship was really targeted at one viewpoint, and I think you talked about it being 10 to 1 that conservative Republicans were targeted for censorship, uh, as opposed to the occasional left leaning Democrat. And oftentimes it's only because two progressives, two liberals, two Democrats were arguing with one another that would result in one of them being censored. But the evidence that we uncovered, not only can I show you actual emails from the White House communications office saying, hey, take down that Tucker Carlson video, take down that Tommy Lahren post, deplatform RFK, but we can also show you that, for instance, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, which we've identified as the nerve center of this vast censorship enterprise, maintains a spreadsheet of targets for government censorship. And I see a lot of parallels between the Global Engagement Center and CISA and this orchestrated campaign to eliminate one viewpoint from public discourse. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't an isolated incident. And I think it's really disturbing that this Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was intended to protect bridges and computer databases. And yet the director of CISA has said publicly like that she also is dedicated to protecting neurological infrastructure. I mean, it could not get more Orwellian. And what's even more frightening is that CISA is within the Department of Homeland Security. This is a federal agency created in the wake of 9/11 to protect Americans from foreign attack. And yet here it's been weaponized against American citizens to violate our right to free speech. But,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I can't speak to CISA specifically, except that there were a lot of requests from Homeland Security, the Global Engagement Center, and the State Department, and the FBI, and there was a lot. I think it's unequivocally coercion at scale, and from the White House. So really, it's over the top, and I really hope the Supreme Court takes an action that gives government pause, and it does not give them encouragement in the diminishment of free speech.
So it dawns on me too that the legacy media has largely failed to cover so many of these stories. And it was telling at the Supreme Court today because Justice Alito and Justice Kavanaugh both latched onto this idea that, if the government were demanding that the print media remove certain content or face legal repercussions, no one would tolerate that. And yet here, the legacy media is almost like an ostrich with its head stuck in the sand, ignoring what's going on big tech. Why is the legacy media? Why do they ignore this issue?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, they're almost in unison, um, supporting and not questioning the government. And but this is a fairly new development. I mean, in times past, the media, the legacy media, when it wasn't the legacy media, would question the government very strongly, and wouldn't trust the government. And now we're being told to trust the government. Um, I mean, there was the whole sort of COVID debacle, where there was a lot of key data points on COVID that were suppressed, um, and 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 the public was just told to trust the government, and there was no questioning of the government by the legacy media. Um, so I don't know. I mean, the the sort of legacy or formerly mainstream media really seems to be largely a cheering squad for the far left and for the government, which is tragic. But I mean, their relevance is declining over time. Um, I think what matters is that for electronic media, that there is freedom of speech because that's where people are. I mean, print newspapers are a dinosaur and they're going away. Um, and but I think that's therefore all the more important that on um, what's called social media, but which is really just electronic media, uh, that there not be constraints from the government and on what people can say. So
So one of the really interesting comments I heard at the Supreme Court today was from Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson when she said that it appeared that the First Amendment was hamstringing the government's response to an emergency. And it kind of dawned on me that I'm not sure that Justice Jackson and I share the same view of the purpose of the Constitution broadly. In other words, my view of the Constitution is that it exists to protect us from the government.
yes,
And so
absolutely.
so the fact that it is hamstringing the First Amendment hamstrings the government's ability to censor free speech is a good thing. And she almost characterized it as a bad thing. And yet the
Yeah,
legacy media, again, ignores that headline altogether in favor of talking about how skeptical the justices were of this coercion argument.
yeah. The whole point of the Constitution is to uh, constrain the power of government, and so that it does not turn against the people. And that's also something where people come here from other countries where they were used to an extremely coercive government, where that they didn't just lack freedom of speech, but they lacked many freedoms. Uh, and That's why you have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, because one of the other things that um, people had in the countries they came from is that they weren't allowed to have guns because the way to suppress the population is to control the news and make sure that the population has no guns. And the point at which you control the flow of information and you have the weapons, you control the people. So I think both the First and Second Amendment are actually very important.
Certainly. And at the end of the day, I think you're spot on that our culture, our society has evolved to the point that electronic media is has completely eclipsed legacy print media. Certainly, the way in which we receive information has changed so much in the past 10, 20 years. Give us some context there. I mean, what is the order of magnitude in this fight? What is truly at stake when you look at just the sheer quantity of individuals impacted who interact and receive information from social media?
Well, I think at this point, almost everyone is on what is called social media. So it is the fundamental way that most people have any voice at all. Because your alternative would be to talk to a reporter and get an article written, and there's only like how many articles do the New York Times or Journal or Washington Post actually produce per day? It's a tiny number. Um, so just getting any voice at all can be difficult or impossible. So it's overwhelmingly electronic media or social media. And social media makes it sound like a group chat. Well, I guess maybe it is kind of a group chat. I mean, what is X? Only known as Twitter, but kind of a group chat for Earth. Um, but yeah, it's like I mean, there's 500 million uh, posts per day, something like that on the X platform. That's globally. Um, so you can compare that to I don't know whether like 500 articles in major newspapers, less than that. So it's like a million times. It's like a million times less. So, and in fact, I have a son. One of my sons has some learning difficulties. It's kind of autistic, and probably got it from me. But uh, he he literally had not noticed a newspaper until we were walking through an airport, and he saw, I think it was Wall Street Journal or something, and he looked at the paper and said, "How did they know it was today?" And I was like, no, no, son, they print that thing out every day. And he says, "What? They print it out every day? What a chore!" And then he said, followed up with, "Oh, they probably just read the internet and print it out." I'm like, yes, that's what they do. Almost no reporters are actually on the scene. They they literally just read the internet and print it out. So a massive number of the articles that are written as because of posts on the X platform or posts on Facebook or somewhere else. But actually, it seems, I think, overwhelmingly on the X platform. At least I don't see a lot of Facebook based stuff. So um, and Instagram is basically just an online modeling agency. So um, the contentious stuff is generally on the X platform.
It does seem like the newspapers, telephones. I mean, these kind of quaint historical anachronisms that were present when I was a child, and you're right. My children have no concept of what these things are. But at the same time, and I know there's been a lot of comparisons about. Certainly, I think that so many of these technologies like telephone or print media, these quaint historical anachronisms and things that I grew up with, and yet my children, like you said, just have no concept of what they are, or the role that they used to play in our society. But at the same time, the social media as a marketplace is different from and distinguishable from some of these past marketplaces, at least in part because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. What role do you think uh, Section 230 of the CDA plays in making it potentially easier for the government to make censorship demands on social media?
Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I've got a good answer to that as a matter of law, but I do think that there does need to be protection of the social media companies from lawsuits for stuff that's on the platform. Otherwise, the social media companies will be sued into oblivion. Um, so we do have a very litigious society. So I think that it is important to have protection from being sued into oblivion, or this will simply be cease to exist, or be forced to engage in draconian censorship out of fear of legal repercussions. So, I think we need to kind of let people say what they want to say, and I do think it's important to have transparency and like how the sort of recommendation algorithm works, and if accounts have been suppressed in any way. Um, so we're actually just rolling out so that if someone knows that they've been uh, have a search ban or whatever, or they've been incorrectly identified as not safe for work, um, or if there's any kind of visibility suppression, it needs to be surfaced to the account holder so they know that it's there. They shouldn't have to try to use third parties to figure it out. Like we're just trying to be as open and transparent as possible. Um, and it's difficult to do that because there's so many layers of code in the system. But I think we're making steady progress, and with things like community notes, I think is a fundamentally good thing. I really encourage people to contribute to community notes because I think that's maybe the best source of truth that I've seen on the internet. Uh, because if somebody posts content on the X platform, in order for a community note to surface, we don't delete that content, but the community note could say that that post is false and here's why, or it could say that post is missing important context. Here's the added context. And in order for that community note to be shown, people who have historically disagreed must agree that the note is good in order for it to be shown. And that's the sort of the key magic there with community notes. And also important to emphasize, community notes, the software is completely open source. There's nothing hidden, and the data is completely open source. So you can recreate independently exactly how a note was written and how it was surfaced. So yeah. So that's, I think, really pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, again, in keeping with your history and legacy of innovation, I mean, the what you've done with X is truly innovative. I mean, in the way in which you're both you're balancing the protection of consumers and customers while simultaneously promoting free, fair, and open debate. Are these best practices that you feel like other social media companies could adopt? Or I mean, are some
Yeah,
of these transplantable?
yeah. I mean, actually, I think what the government should be trying to do is insist that social media companies uh, make their recommendation algorithm uh, transparent, open source, and that there be no hidden censorship. So, like any censorship actions, like any suppression of an account or suspension of an account, should be visible to that account and be visible to the like public. Like you can actually find out that this has happened. Like there's currently a massive amount of hidden censorship that is done by Google, and by, frankly, also by Facebook and Instagram. And so, and people have no idea about this. And by the way, the Google censorship might be the most pernicious because it's very easy for them to just nudge a link onto the second page. And there's that old joke of what's the best place to, hide a dead body? Well, it's the second page of Google search results because nobody ever looks there. So that's that's pretty important to, say, hey, did Google nudge a search result to the second page? Because that'll drop how many people see it by a factor of 10 or more, maybe 100. So there's a whole bunch of that happening that's very subtle, and so you can't. It's much harder to detect than, say, an account suspension. Um, so I think that's what the government should be fighting for. It should be fighting for transparency. It should be fighting for individual rights, allowing people to say what they want to say within the bounds of the law, and as opposed to trying to censor and suppress people's opinions.
Yeah. What and I think that the you opening Twitter and releasing the Twitter files. And again, so much of it corroborates what we've learned through the discovery process and our lawsuit in Missouri v. Biden, that the Supreme Court is it's been submitted at this point to the Supreme Court after oral argument today. But this is just one front in the fight for free speech. Do you see other fronts opening out there? I mean, certainly we've seen corporate pressure campaigns to try to eliminate safe spaces for free, fair, and open debate. I mean, what else do you
Yeah.
see in this fight?
No, there's a bit of a challenge with advertisers where um, pressure groups will, like various non sort of charities and NGOs, non-governmental entities, organizations will get together, and then they will attack advertisers who advertise on, say, the X platform or some other platform, in order to starve the companies of revenue. And actually, Facebook, to give Zuckerberg some credit, he did try to actually fight off the advertiser censorship, but I think he ultimately did give in. Um, they lost billions of dollars in revenue. Uh, so, advertisers, if you're like a, sort of household name brand, you really you just really don't want to have any strife. So they tend to freak out if some activist organizations get some article written about how they're advertising next to content that's bad, and then they tend to kind of panic and then and pause their advertising. So we had a lot of that on the X platform. Um, about 2/3 of our U.S. advertising was suspended, or it just went on pause. They we said it's a boycott, but I don't want to say it's boycott. It's just paused, except the pause never ends. Um, so if we had not been able to reduce our costs dramatically, the X would have, formerly Twitter, would have gone bankrupt. And that's fully what they were trying to do. They were trying to drive the company into bankruptcy, which obviously is major suppression of free speech. So, basically, the chain of events is like these, like the so-called charities and NGOs that that pressure advertisers via the legacy media, and the advertisers get skittish and suspend their advertising, and effectively it becomes a boycott. So that's a pretty big deal, actually. that's something that should be dealt with. So there might be some RICO Act violations there.
Yeah, certainly. And one of the other ways I've looked at it is from the standpoint of a potential antitrust issue where you've got this market manipulation and what level of coordination and whom does that benefit. So certainly these are new experiences in a evolving marketplace. But I think I wanted to go back to one of the things you said that I think really struck a chord with me, and it's that it dawns on me that the First Amendment protects not only speakers but listeners. So, like, our
Sure.
right to free speech is not just our right to say something, but
Right.
the right of the people to hear something. And so,
Exactly.
like, when you get speech suppressed on X or on Facebook, not only are the people making the posts, their rights are violated, but anyone who would have reviewed that information, it's almost, when you look at Google and the deplatforming, de-emphasizing, shadow banning, like you said, hiding things on the second page of the Google search. I mean, it's this shadowy suppression of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could drive an entire viewpoint from public discourse, and the world may never know.
Yes, exactly. It might be worth having some people say a few words. I see Mike Benz is there, and he's got a lot to say about this sort of stuff. Maybe we could have Mike say a few words.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate this is a fascinating conversation, and Andrew, thank you so much for spearheading this fight. This is, I hope the entire galactic universe is sending their spirit energy to you this week. You are the tip of the spear, and this, I think, if this action had been brought years ago, we might not be in the position we're in. There's a few things that I just wanted to maybe relay for your sort of strategic consideration and for the education of the audience, and that is, with respect, I heard the dialogue about the role of the media in this, and questions about why the media is not, taking up the issue, and that gets to another thing that I think would be really helpful to be able to stress with respect to convincing justices if you agree with this strategic assessment, which is the whole of society model that the government set up is definitive proof of coercion and collusion, and it's the government's own words, so you don't even need to establish it as some novel theory. So Elon was speaking about the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which was created in 2014 initially to take on ISIS, to give the State Department a way to censor ISIS recruiters on Facebook and Twitter. It was really the first ever formal government censorship office, but it was supposed to be foreign facing. And then after the 2016 election, that same network around the State Department's Global Engagement Center, this is basically a group called the Atlantic Council, which is a big backer of Biden world, not to make things political, but this is what they did. They had these planning documents with how to set up a censorship office within the Department of Homeland Security. And they proposed first putting it at the State Department's Global Engagement Center, but said, hey, that's too foreign facing. Maybe we could park it at an intelligence agency like the CIA or the FBI. They ultimately decided on DHS, which would combine essentially this foreign facing media power that the CIA has with the domestic jurisdiction of the FBI, with DHS being the only other domestic intelligence equity besides the FBI that that would be able to take on speech. And because the FBI is the intelligence arm of the Justice Department, they didn't think the FBI was the appropriate place to park this CISA operation, because it's not illegal to tweet about mail-in ballots or vaccine, negative efficacy or whatnot. And so they created this very deliberately. Now, DHS documents starting in late 2018 contemplated the construction, not just contemplated, they planned and they held entire meetings to create this whole of society model, which in their view fuses together the government, the private sector, civil society, and media in four quadrants to act in unison for censorship activity. That is, the government would provide funding and coordination. The civil society institutions like the university centers, which function as these sort of mercenary firms, these are places like the Stanford Internet Observatory and the University of Washington and MIT and Harvard, that they would put pressure on the private sector institutions that is the platforms. And this is what Twitter 1.0, we saw this in the Twitter files and many other cases. They were complaining about all the pressure from civil society, from the universities, from the NGOs, from the nonprofits, from the community leaders and activist groups. But the fourth quadrant was the media. In 2016, when the censorship industry was getting constructed, the media was facing two sources of pressure. One is their revenues were being squeezed by online media. They were being outcompeted by citizen journalism. And because citizen journalists don't have to pay these vast staffs and the content was free and even more popular, they faced a commercial threat from these, from alternative news. At the same time, forces within the U.S. government through this whole society model were onboarding these media organizations to join the whole society censorship alliance. So they had both a commercial and a political impetus to engage in, to not just engage in, but to actively support at all measures these censorship activities. And the government even contemplated how the media could be used as another source of pressure to induce crises on the platforms, and that might could contribute to advertiser boycotts. In fact, there's a September 2018 DHS document that specifically talked about how these kind of advertiser boycotts might be marshaled by supporting institutions like NewsGuard when it was just in its infancy. NewsGuard is a professional advertiser boycotting company. So you have this whole society model, which by itself, establishes the censorship laundering process. And if you go to the top of my timeline right now, at Mike Ben Cyber, for anyone listening, you'll see at the very top of it, I have a 2.5 minute supercut of government officials from DHS, from the State Department, from the Pentagon, from USAID, one by one, all the different, because the formal title is Whole Society, Whole of Government. This is when Elon was referring to the to the fact that it's bigger than just DHS and it's bigger than just the State Department's Global Engagement Center. It it was because after DHS established this office, as AG Bailey laid out, DHS did serve as that nerve center from 2019 through 2022. But the formal title was Whole Society, Whole of Government, meaning every government institution was tasked to lend its own proprietary resources, whether that's in censorship funding, like the National Science Foundation, censorship pressure, like the FBI, censorship policy coordination, like DHS, or censorship outsourcing, like the Pentagon and the State Department. So this is now a whole, what's at issue here in terms of censorship laundering in this case is whether this whole of society model is valid. And one thing that I would just propose, another thing strategically is, I heard this argument today in the oral argument about narrow tailoring. Another video I just put at the top of my timeline is a proposal, and again, this is just for your consideration, Andrew and everyone else on your team. One way that you can slice through that narrow tailoring question is to look at the propaganda versus censorship model, or dichotomy, as being knob upturning and knob downturning, and proposing a constitutional limit on the ability to act as essentially a hedge fund, if you will. And the analogy that I draw here, and this will be the last thing I'll say, because thank you for your time, I appreciate you letting me speak here. But there are limits on financial institutions around mutual funds, for example. Mutual funds are these huge endowments of money, and because of their size and the nature of what they're entrusted to protect, they're limited from short selling. Mutual funds can only go long. They are barred by law from engaging in short selling because of what would happen to the market if that much money with that many people's pension funds were to go short and attack a stock, do a bear raid on a stock. Now, hedge funds have more flexibility. The U.S. government always had a sort of mutual fund model when it comes to propaganda. They're going to argue, well, the government needs to be able to get its message out. If they think that vaccines are safe and effective, they need to be able to get their message out. If they think, administration of an election, mail-in ballots are safe and secure, they need to get the message out. If they want a message on the Ukraine war, they need to get the message out. You can leave that intact by saying, yes, okay, the mutual fund model, is sufficient. Knob upturning, there may be some room there. But when it comes to knob downturning, they can't act as essentially a sort of hedge fund and solve their problem with respect to coordinating with government officials by short selling or by laundering censorship, knob downturning through the whole society, whether that's the private sector, the civil society, or the media allies.
All right. I mean, if I could just hope one thing with respect to the Supreme Court decision is that they err on the side of free speech. It's really that it's not going to be a clean cut thing either way, but it's just if you got to make, you know, give one thing the benefit of the doubt, I think we've got to give benefit of the doubt. Benefit of the doubt has got to go to more freedom of speech, not less. Because there's steady encroachment on freedom of speech as it is, and so and there's certainly even if there's if some people think there isn't any fire, there's certainly a lot of smoke, and I think there is fire actually with respect to impingement on free speech. So I just hope that the Supreme Court comes down with erring on the side of freedom of speech. This is really, I think, the right move for the future. I think we can't have a functioning democracy if people can't speak their mind. So I sure hope that happens. Let's see. There's a few others maybe that are worth hearing from. I don't think we've got time for everyone, but let's see. I guess add Alex and Brian, and let's see if this works.
Hey,
I
how are you
think
guys?
I think Alex and Brian. I think both of you guys were at some point suspended.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yes, we both were. So I was suspended back in April of 2020. Never got a real clear answer on that one, but it came suspiciously after I posted a Joe Biden meme where it was, one of those generated things where people would say like, "I support Joe Biden," and it would be their profile picture. So I made it into a meme and say, Xi Jinping supports Joe Biden for president, and then 20 minutes later, I was suspended. And
Yeah.
suspiciously, when the Twitter files came out, it was the same sort of meme that someone else was targeted. It wasn't my post, but somebody else. I think James Woods had his
Yeah.
requested to
James
be
was the
censored by
actor.
the DNC.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly. It's the point at which accounts are getting suspended for memes. You know you've got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had somebody actually be arrested for memes at the behest of the Biden DOJ. But I know that's an entirely different issue. But still, yeah, memes are criminal these days.
Yeah,
So,
and
so
Brian, it's worth clarifying. You're generally you're a Democrat and outspoken Democrat, so it's helpful
yeah,
for
well,
people to know that.
my ban was kind of unique. So they said that I was banned for buying my account, and Ed was too.
Okay.
Um, we didn't actually buy our accounts though, and it would be interesting if you have actual documentation on this that you could go back and actually view. We contacted X or Twitter at the time through our legal team, which was just two lawyers that we hired, uh, and we considered suing Twitter for defamation because they put out a statement saying that we were buying interactions and faking our engagement. And when we contacted Twitter, they basically told us that they thought that we bought our account, and they made us sign like a non-disclosure agreement saying that we can't share anything, and which I have since, after you purchased the company, I was like, Elon's not going to sue me for this. But
No,
I have since.
definitely not.
I hope you don't, at least.
No, not at all. Of course.
We did find out that they thought we actually purchased our accounts. We showed them the emails from 2010 from when we actually registered the accounts. But the reason they thought we purchased the accounts was because we had the accounts in 2010 and we changed the names a couple times to like various things that were totally off topic from what we eventually used them for, and before we changed them to our name currently. So they had reason to believe it wasn't worth a lawsuit because they deemed us public figures, and our lawyer tended to agree that we probably would be a public figure, and we'd have to prove malice. I don't think it was malicious, but yeah, I mean, I think Twitter was heavy-handed. I
Yeah.
disagree with them banning so many right-leaning accounts. Even though I disagree with those accounts, I'm happy that you took over and you straightened that out. Of course, I don't agree with everything everybody says, but I also don't think that a company should be the one deciding what's right to be posted and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. It's, I mean, the uh, this situation with X is often characterized as sort of a right wing takeover, but really I would characterize it as a moderate wing takeover, um, in that there's like to the best of my knowledge, no prominent say Democrat account or left leaning account has been suspended, or if there is, I'm happy to you know we're happy to fix that. But I don't think that's the case. Just that it's that we did not suspend voices on the right, and we um, allowed those accounts to come back on. So, um, but it's going to it will be seen as a move to the right because it was so far left. If you move to the center from the far left, it is, I guess, a move to the right, but it's really just a move to the center. At least that's the aspiration. Now I'll have my own views, which personal views on the subject, which I'll continue to speak my mind as I sort of see fit, independent of the platform. But the platform itself is intended to be fair and even-handed, and not biased towards any one account or any viewpoint.
Yeah, and I think personally for me, I think if you go back 5 or 6 years, I don't think I was entirely against Twitter banning some of the people I disagree with. And it wasn't until I was actually banned that I realized how stupid that was of me to think that. Because everybody thinks they're right and the other
Sure.
person is wrong. So
No,
I think
exactly.
that you need to put the shoe on put the other person's shoes on your feet and try and walk in them for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, free speech is only relevant when it's someone you don't like saying something you don't like. Uh, if because if that's not if that's you know that there's free speech if someone you don't like can say something you don't like. But if that's not the case, then it's really, I think, only a matter of time before that censorship apparatus is turned on you. Um, so that's that's why we want freedom of speech, but it necessarily will mean that, like, you might really hate what someone you hate is saying, but that's how you have free speech. So, well, let's see. Um, is there anything more that you'd like to say? That's, yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody. I think this is a really illuminating conversation. Mike, Benz, especially, like, man, you issued a clarion call for reforms on this stuff a long time ago, and have really been attacked by the legacy media. And so, just want to express gratitude for again being a voice in the wilderness on this stuff. Obviously, Elon, everything you've done to support the free, fair, and open marketplace of ideas, the innovations you've brought. Kind of as a closing thought, we're about to enter an election cycle to the extent we haven't already. We are talking about elections. We're talking about election integrity. We're talking about political candidates. And when you see the type of viewpoint discrimination that you've uncovered through the Twitter files, or that certainly we feel like we put on as evidence based on the discovery we obtained in this lawsuit, where this isn't equitable. Like, it's not like everyone, all viewpoints are treated equal. The Biden administration clearly targeted anyone who dissented with their policy positions. And so the suppression of free speech was really targeted at core political speech, at least in the evidence that we've uncovered. What does this mean? It's dripping with irony that the same people who profess to want to promote truth against disinformation and misinformation and want to, protect democracy, would undermine our democratic process and suppress truthful speech. And this has never been about truth. It's always been about power. But what do you see as we move into an election cycle? Kind of as closing thoughts, as far as what's at stake in this fight for free speech as it relates to elections?
Yeah, well, I think it's essential to have free speech, in order, like, to know, well, who should you vote for. If what that person says is censored, or suppressed, then you don't know whether you should vote for one candidate or another. Um, so and I think it's sometimes, like, there are people, and like, I actually know a lot of people, and the FBI and Homeland Security and the State Department, and I don't think they were like bad people actually, but it's just you just can't have this government censorship apparatus exist at all, and I think if and for those that are like that do want it to exist, they as Brian alluded to mentioned earlier, it's like you got to be prepared to have the shoe be on the other foot. Like, okay, so if there's suppression of people on the right, well, what happens? Let's say if Trump were to win in November, well, then he would have those same tools to use against the left. So I think we want to just have those tools not exist. Because as long as they exist, I think those in power will not be able to resist the temptation to use them.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being present and being involved in the conversation. I think that again, the truth will emerge from the competition of ideas and free, transparent, and public discourse, and that's why this fight is so important. And especially as we move into an election cycle, I know I want to thank you, Elon, for everything you've done in this, in this space, and specifically with the Twitter files and in the fight for free speech in America. And certainly, we're going to continue to fight in Missouri v. Biden to root out the vast censorship enterprise and put an end to it once and for all. Hopefully, the Supreme Court does the right thing, energized by getting to be there today to make argument in this case. And can't thank everybody enough for your time.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. That was pretty interesting. I think Elon is not wrong to advocate for free speech. If you didn't listen from the beginning, feel free to listen from the beginning. And I'll see you in the next video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.